It is odd to stand in one of those and recognize that the post you're standing to is a piece of the silo because it's divided by deck, and that in that silo are nuclear warheads. It's terrifying. Now, here's the thing. I came to Bloomberg having written a book about submarine spying during the Cold War, which was all about figuring out how to track these things, how to make it so that if there was a first strike, the nuclear missiles in our oceans couldn't give a second strike. I also spend a lot of my time these days trying to convince people that no matter how stolid or regimented your job may be, all the best work happens when you're creative. And that happened even during the Cold War and even with the military. There was a fellow who had been kicked out of Rickover's nuclear navy. Admiral Rickover was insane, but he is the father of the nuclear submarine. And he was kicked out because he would not follow Rickover's rules. And he found himself on basically coming up with spy missions, sitting in the deepest, darkest recesses of the E-ring of the Pentagon. And he wanted to come up with a mission that would somehow let us know what the Soviets were doing. We were trying to follow them out in the open waters, but what were their missions going to be? What were they thinking? And he knew there were at least 3 bases, naval bases, separated from the mainland by bodies of water. One of those was across the Sea of Okhotsk on the Kamchatka Peninsula. And he kept thinking, if only we could figure out how to, well, he thought there must be cables under there. There must be hardwired telephone cables. He didn't know this, but he knew that the Soviets wanted people to check in on a regular basis. They wanted to give rules. They wanted to give information. They wanted to give orders. And he thought everything had to be super encoded and everything was very paranoid. But what if there was a hardwire cable across the water? Just what if we can access that? Maybe they wouldn't be so careful. So he was thinking, how would we find it? He wanted to send a U.S. submarine into the bowels of a Soviet sea, which would surely be considered an act of war. He wanted to find a cable, and then he wanted to send divers to walk on the ground with a telephone tap, basically. And he envisioned an induction tap that would wrap around, but he still didn't know if a cable existed and how to find it. But when he was a kid, he was growing up along the Mississippi River, and his mother used to drag him on riverboat rides to get out of the summer heat, and he was bored silly. So he'd hang out in the pilot house with the captain, and he would watch the shore, and there were these signs along the shore saying, cable crossing, do not anchor, to keep some idiot in a pleasure boat from wrecking telephone cables. And he decided if we had those idiots, the Soviets must too. And somehow he convinced our government to take the risk of sneaking into the Sea of Okhotsk, which was the most desolate of the 3 bodies of water, covered with ice half the time, to see if they could, with a tiny little periscope peeking out, find signs along a lonesome beach somewhere saying, hey guys, cable right here. The odd thing is it happened. Oh, and before they set off, by the way, they wanted to have the means to tap the cable. So what did they need? They needed an induction cable that would wrap around. We had good tech guys, as Herb has said. We figured it out. But they also needed people to be able to walk on the bottom of the sea. And the divers would have to be acclimated somehow. And there was no room in the sub for a decompression chamber. So the halibut, the USS Halibut, was set out with great fanfare after the Thresher, the first sub we ever lost, with something on its back that was billed as the first decompression rescue vehicle. We would know how to save our guys, only it was welded to the deck. It was a hidden in plain sight decompression chamber for divers. They would do the entire trip in this thing. And would you know, the halibut goes out. The men are told they're looking for missile pieces. They had these cameras they were trailing. Finds the cable on the beach, finds the cable tap, gets the induction cable on. And in that first few moments, they got to hear Soviet men practicing English as they wooed their girlfriends. They got to hear orders being given in unencrypted Russian. And that was the first of a series of missions that literally led to the end of the Cold War. Now, if you want to know how, there's a documentary that's free on YouTube based on Blind Man's Bluff, my book, and the rest of the details are there. Or he can bring me back for another talk.